Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly Thursday evening shir. The shir is Leiluy, Nishmat, Daniella, Shaina, Alehu Hashalom, Bas Yehoshua, Falik, and Nishmat should have an aliyah. Allah Yidin Ayashia. This Shabbos is Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, Sunday and Monday, Rosh Chodesh Elul. We want to wish everybody a kasiva v'chasimah tova. Should be written and sealed for a good year, l'shana tova masukah, for a year filled with goodness and sweetness. There are, I believe, 7 or 8 chapters of Tehillim that are written in the order of the Aleph Beis, where the verses follow the alphabetical order. Some of them more famous, some of them less. One of them, chapter 34, Kapitel Lamed Dalet, is recited by us every Shabbos morning in davening. And it begins with the words, LeDovid, a psalm of David, which means that he pretended to lose his mind. He changed his reasoning. He presented himself as an insane person in the presence of Avimelech, the presence of a king. Vayegoshehu, the king banished him. Vayelech, and he left, and he composed an entire chapter of Tehillim, thanking Hashem for being banished by Avimelech, one of the Philistine kings, after changing his mind, after changing his sanity, and presenting himself as a person who was insane. This is the story we're going to learn about tonight in Shmuel Aleph, Perek Chof Aleph. The story begins in Pasuk Yud Aleph and goes all the way till the end of the chapter. In context, briefly, we learned last time that Dovid, in the process of fleeing Shaul HaMelech, comes to a city called Noiv. Noiv is a city where the Mishkan of Hashem is present, where there are Kohanim who are present. There he seeks refuge, he seeks shelter, he seeks food, he seeks weaponry, and actually he ends up getting everything that he asked for. However, in Noiv, in this city, Dovid also becomes aware that an individual by the name of Doeg, who was one of Shaul's faithful men, has become aware of David seeking sanctuary, of David seeking refuge in the city of Noiv. And David becomes aware, David suspects that Doeg is going to repeat back to Shaul everything that happened, and the help that David received in the city of Noiv from the Kohanim, and that there would be retribution. There would be hell to pay, pardon the expression, against the city of Noiv and its Kohanim for assisting Dovid Hamelech. Dovid Hamelech's intuition turned out to be correct, and as we'll learn later, Shaul in the end has the entire city of Kohanim wiped out. But in the meanwhile, the Torah turns its attention and tells us what David did next. It seems, the commentaries explain, it seems that David was concerned to seek refuge among his brothers, the Jews. It seems he was afraid that if Jews protected him, or if Jews were perceived as protecting him, they would face the terrible wrath, the illogical anger of King Shaul, and that Jews would see retribution for this. So in an effort to prevent any more Jewish bloodshed, and in a desperate attempt to find for himself a place to flee, David takes his men and they actually flee to the Pelishtim, which is just an amazing phenomenon. David flees to the mortal and eternal enemies of the Jews, the Philistines, the Pelishtim, to seek refuge from Shaul in a way that will not endanger other Jews. The Torah says that the king, the Philistine king that David sought refuge with, was a man named Achish. The city where Achish lived was a city called Gath. Achish, the king of Gath, is where Dovid Hamelech set his sights. All right, the Gemara explains that all Philistine kings were all called Avimelech, kind of like how all Egyptian kings were all called Parai, or things like that. So that's why Dovid Hamelech in this chapter of Tehillim praises Hashem for saving him from Avimelech, but the specific man's name was Achish, the king of Gas. So David takes his men and they flee to the city of Gas. He runs to the king and he hopes that he won't be recognized there. He hopes he'll stay under the radar and he can just be protected there from Shaul. Okay. But David does get recognized. He's recognized not by the king himself. Achish himself does not recognize David. But the servants, Avdei Achish, the servants of David, recognize David. And they tell their king, they tell Achish, that this is the man who has slain Goliath. This is the man who has killed Goliath. And they ask Achish the king, they ask the Philistine king for permission to kill David. Achish is hesitant. He's not convinced that this is in fact the man. And even if he is, Achish says to his men, I don't understand. Goliath challenged the Jews to a fair fight, and they won. The Jews, that is. If this in fact is David, then he won. Why would you seek to kill David for what it is that he did? And here I'm going to read the pasuk to you. I'm going to translate it. I'm going to tell you how the commentaries explain it. Vayoimru, says the Torah, Shmuel Aleph Perak Chaf Aleph pasuk Yud Beis. Vayoimru Achish, Vayoimru Avdei Achish Elav, and the servants of Achish say to him, the king, Haloi Zeh Dovid Melech Haaretz. This is David, the king of the land. Haloi lo zeh yanu b'mcholos. It was for this man that they danced with musical instruments. They danced in circles, Lamar, and the Jewish women praised him and said, Hiko Shaul ba'alofov, Shaul struck thousands. V'David b'riv havoisov. And David struck tens of thousands. The Torah says David overheard the way the servants of the Philistine king Achish were talking about him to the king, to the Philistine king, to Achish. And David became incredibly fearful. He became incredibly afraid. And so the commentaries explain, what was it exactly that David heard that made him so fearful? You see, it turns out, if you go back to the story of Goliath and his challenge, if you go back to the story of Goliath and his challenge against the Jews, the Torah says that Goliath stood there Here we go. That Goliath stood there and challenged the Jews. And Goliath said like this. Goliath said, send forth one volunteer from the Jewish community who will come forward and wage war with me. Im yuchal lehilochem iti, Goliath said, if you're the Jewish volunteer, will be able to fight against me. Vehikoni, and strike me, says Goliath. V'hoyinu lochem la'avodim, we the Philistines, the Plishtim, will all be your slaves. V'imani uchaloi, and if I, Goliath, will strike him, will kill him, the Jewish representative who steps forward to challenge me, v'hikisev, and I will kill him, v'yisem lonu la'avodim ba'avadim ma'asanu, and you, the Jews, will be our slaves, and you will serve us. Before Goliath was challenged by David, Goliath challenged the entire Jewish nation, and Goliath said, send forth one Jew who will wrestle with me. If I win, said Goliath, and I strike down the Jewish volunteer, all the Jews will be our slaves. And if the Jew wins and kills me, Goliath, then all of us Plishtim will be the Jewish slaves. This was the challenge that Goliath presented to the Jewish people. Of course, Goliath wanted Shaul Hamelech himself to step forward and challenge him. But Shaul was afraid and refused. In the end, it was David who steps forward, challenges Goliath and wins, literally beheads him, and all the Plishtim run away. it seems the Jews either didn't have the ability or the desire to cash in on Goliath's pledge before he was put to death by David. It seems the Jews had either not the opportunity or the political or the military ability to enslave all of the Palestinians by virtue of the pledge that Goliath himself had made before he was struck down, where Goliath said, "If I'm struck down by a Jew, then all of us Palestinians will be servants to you, the Jews." Apparently, they went their separate ways. The Palestinians went their way, the Jews went their way. But now Dovid is fleeing from Shaul Hamelech, and Dovid ends up in the courtyard of Achish Melech Gas. And Achish, the servants of Achish, tell Achish, "We got to kill this man. He's Dovid, the one who beheaded Dovid, the one who beheaded Goliath." And Achish says, "What do you want from the guy? It was a fair fight." And the servants say, "Oh, really? It was a fair fight? Do you know what the terms of this fight was? Do you know what the terms of this fight was? Goliath pledged that if he loses, all of the Plishtim will be slaves to the Jews." They said to Achish, if that was a fair fight, they said to him, quote, "Stand up from your throne and give it to this man, David. All of us are slaves to him. Or let us kill David." David hears this and he becomes incredibly afraid. He's afraid that now that Achish's very royalty is being challenged because of his presence, he's afraid that Achish is going to have no choice but to allow his men to kill David. And so David, at this point, chooses to embrace the image of a man who is insane. By Shaina Tamoy Be'eneim, the Torah says, he pretended to be crazy. By Yishoilel Biyodam, he feigned insanity in front of their eyes. By Yisav al Dalsais Hashar, he wrote on the doorway of the gate of the king, Vayoyer Riroyel Zakonai, and he allowed saliva to rain down on his beard. The commentaries say that David took a pen and he wrote on the gates of the city, he wrote on the gates of the palace that the king owes him money and the queen owes him money. And as he allowed the saliva to drip down onto his beard, he created the image, he presented the front of being a person who was insane. Achish, the commentaries explain, was particularly sensitive to this facade that David put on of being a mentally unhealthy man. Because Achish had a daughter who was herself a woman who was challenged in mental health. And so when he sees this, that the person who's being accused of being David, of killing Goliath, of threatening the very liberty of all the Plishtim, he sees him acting like a crazy person. Achish says those famous words. He says, quote, "Chasar meshugoyim ani." Do I lack meshugoyim? Do I lack people challenged in mental health? Ki evesem ezelish dagei olai, that you've brought this person to my palace, that he also is a person who is mentally unstable, who is insane. And he says, "Get rid of this guy." And David is able to flee. Achish refuses to believe that this is in fact David, the man who's killed Goliath. He says, "This is just a meshuganer. This is just an insane, unhealthy, unstable person." And David is able to flee. And he composed this chapter of Tehillim that I mentioned before, chapter Lamed Daled, praising Hashem for this particular salvation. That's the story as it is recorded in the Torah. Along comes the Midrash, of course. Along comes the Midrash and fills in the juice, gives us the neshama, gives us the soul of the story. The Midrash says, why did David choose, of all the different ways he could have saved himself, he could have got out of the clutches of the king, of the Philistine king? Why did David choose to feign insanity? Why this specifically? Okay, on a simple level, because the king himself had a daughter who was not healthy. So he figured this would strike a chord, this would resonate, this would hit close to home, and this would make him the kind of company that the king doesn't want around. The Midrash describes how the king's daughter was shouting and screaming inside the palace, and David was screaming outside the palace. And the king said, Genug, I don't want any more of this, send him away. On a simple level, it was because David noticed that in the king's own family, there were mental health challenges. But the Midrash says there was a story behind the story. And here's what it is. It says the Midrash, Dovid Hamelech one day complained to the Rabbeinu Shalom, complained to the Eibishter. Rabbeinu Shalom, he said Dovid Hamelech. The Torah says in Koheles, Es hakoil osa yofa b'itay. Everything that you, Hashem, have made in the world is beautiful in its own time. It has a moment in history where it shines. It has its place where it contributes to the general system that Hashem has created, where it makes its contribution and its mark. Everything in this world serves a purpose. Even if we don't understand it now, at some point we do. And things, said Dovid Hamelech, come together in a divine, mystical, magical way. I understand, says Dovid Hamelech. But there's only one thing I don't get. There's only one thing, says Dovid Hamelech, as I look out into the world and I study the world that you, Hashem, made. There's one thing that you, the Rabbeinu Shalom, made in this world, and I don't understand why. It doesn't seem to serve any purpose. What is that? Seems like a never-ending source of pain without anything to contribute. Why did you make this? What is this? Says Dovid Hamelech, I don't understand why you, Hashem, created human beings with mental health challenges. Why? What purpose does it serve? Where's the beauty? Where's the contribution to Hashem's perfectly complicated world? What for? Actually, if I remember correctly, Dovid Hamelech asked about two things. Dovid Hamelech asked about the mentally challenged, and Dovid Hamelech asked about spiders. What purpose do spiders serve? And Hashem told David, you will see that there will be a moment in your life where the mentally challenged and the spiders will save your life. And you will thank me at that point, at that juncture in your life. You will thank me for creating them. How did spiders save Dovid Hamelech's life? You all know the story. Later on, David is hiding in a cave from Shaul. And Shaul and his men are hot on his heels, chasing him to kill him. And David is looking for a place to hide, and he finds a cave, and he slips in and he hides in there. But Shaul's men are so close that within a couple of minutes, they're going to arrive at this cave. And Hashem sends spiders to spin webs across the opening of the cave. And as Shaul's men arrive, and they run up right there by this cave, and they think to themselves, they actually stop and consciously say to themselves, should we go into this cave and look for Dovid Hamelech? But there they see the webs, and they say, no. It's not possible for him to be hiding in this cave, because he would never have been able to get through without breaking those webs. So surely these webs mean that nobody has gone in there recently, and they leave David in the cave and they run away. So the spiders saved David's life. But what about shtus, or in the words of the Midrash, shoitim, the mentally challenged? What about those? Dovid Hamelech says to Hashem, what's the purpose of creating these individuals? And Hashem says to him, one day, not only will you thank me for creating them, but you'll see that they will save your life. And so when David is stuck here in the palace of Achish Melech Gas, and his life is once again in danger, he's threatened from the inside and he's threatened from the outside, and he's looking for a way out. He remembers this conversation he had with Hashem, where he said to Hashem, why did you create shaitim in the world? And Hashem said, one day they're going to save your life. And he tells himself, perhaps this is what Hashem meant, that now I should pretend as if I am one of them. And he does, and he is saved. I should add that according to the commentaries are in debate here. The commentaries debate and argue whether Dovid just pretended to be insane or whether he actually davened to Hashem and asked that Hashem grant him this mentally altered state of mind. According to some, Dovid actually lost his mind until he was banished from the palace of the king of the Plishtim. He didn't want to fake it. He was afraid if he would fake it, he would be caught in his lie. He would be caught in his superficial presentation. So he actually davened to Hashem that he become temporarily insane, and he did. And only then was he banished from the palace. Which, according to this explanation, it's understood even stronger why David, the answer that Hashem gave David, you're asking, Hashem said to David, why I created Mishagoyim in the world. You'll see that one day you yourself will be one of them and you'll be saved because of it. This is the conclusion of the Midrash. Now, let's think about this, if but for a few minutes. The question that Dovid Hamelech is asking, it's not a simple question. It's a very emotionally charged question. He's not asking Hashem, why is there pain in the world? He's not just asking Hashem, why is there pain in the world? He's not just asking Hashem, why is there suffering in the world? He's not just asking Hashem, why do bad things happen to good people or things like that. He's asking a much more, those are also very difficult questions, but he's asking a very specific question. He's asking Hashem, Rabbeinu Shalom, what is the purpose? What purpose is served by individuals who live in an altered state of consciousness because they're unhealthy in this way? They cannot process reality as we can. They cannot process their own frame of mind, their own emotions, as so to speak, ordinary or healthy human beings can. It seems like a terribly painful and pointless suffering. He asks the Ribbono Shel Olam, why did you do this? That's a good question. But instead of answering, Hashem says, one day, you yourself are going to be saved through this, which doesn't really answer the question, okay? So one day, David is saved by either pretending or by actually not having control over his state of mind. By experiencing shtus and folly, he's actually saved through this. But what's the answer to the question? Why does Hashem make it? Was there no other way to save Dovid Hamelech? Why does Hashem do it this way? And here the commentaries say something amazing. Go back, take a step back, the commentaries say. What's really going on here? David arrives in the land of the Plishtim. David arrives in the royal palace of the king of the Plishtim. He's pretending, he's hoping to go unnoticed. He doesn't want to attract any attention. He just wants to stay here below the radar, so Shaul won't be able to find him, or Shaul won't be able to kill him. He wants to protect himself in a way that won't put the life of any other Jew in danger, as it did with the Noiv city, as it did in Noiv, the city of Kohanim. He wants to just kind of just stay away from any unwanted attention. So he shows up in this place and he hopes to stay incognito. But he gets recognized. And the servants of the king come to the king of the Plishtim and say, Haloi zeh Dovid Melech Haaretz. They say, King, you don't know who's in your backyard pretending to be a nobody. This is Dovid Melech Haaretz, David, the king of the world. David was trying to remain in hiding. And he's discovered identified and labeled as Dovid Melech HaOretz. Not just the king of the Jews, not just the king of Israel, not just the king of the Plishtim, but Dovid Melech HaOretz. Not just Dovid Melech Yisrael. And the servants of Achish the king say to him, this man's existence threatens your position as king. For as long as he lives, you have no right to royalty. Because when Goliath, the mighty warrior, the representative of all the Plishtim, challenged the Jews, he told the Jews that if he, Goliath, were to lose, all the Plishtim would be slaves to all the Jews forever. David's trying to eat dinner quietly with a few men. He wants to go unnoticed. He wants to live a private life. Yes, he knows he's been anointed by the prophet Shmuel as the king over the Jewish people, but he knows his time has not come yet. For as long as Shaul is alive, Shaul is the acting king. So he wants to hide. And he's identified by the Goyim as Dovid Melech Haaretz, as David, the king of the world. What's he going to do with that now? The Torah says David was very afraid. His identity is in limbo. On the one hand, the Goyim are right. David's existence, David is a king. David did slay Goliath. And the killing of Goliath does mean that all the Plishtim are the slaves of the Jews. It's true. On the other hand, David's not ready to ascend to this position quite yet. He wants time. He wants to be able to remain in hiding. He wants to hold this true identity of himself. He wants to hold it in hiding for a little longer. But his surroundings, the Goyim, won't let him do this. Instead, the Goyim insist, and they say this to the king. They say to the king, as long as this man is alive, you, the king, are his slave. When I was preparing for this shiur, I was reminded of a beautiful, very famous Midrash in Megillas Esther. In Megillas Esther, the commentaries talk about Mordechai's refusal to bow to Haman. The Torah says, V'chol avdei HaMelech asher b'shar HaMelech, all the servants of Achashverosh, all the king's servants, everybody who was in the king's gate, everybody was bowing down to Haman. Ki chein tziva loi, because this is what the king instructed. But Mordechai refused. And Haman was infuriated by the fact that Mordechai wouldn't bow down to him. He couldn't handle the chutzpah. In fact, the Megillah says, Haman comes home to his family one day and tells his family, I'm rich, I'm famous, I'm successful, I'm invited to royal banquets, me, the king and the queen. I am on top of the world. But every time I see Mordechai, everything I have is worth nothing to me. V'chol zeh einenu shoivli, it's all worth nothing to me. So the Midrash says, why? Why did Haman get so upset when he saw Mordechai refuse to bow down to him? Why did Haman say that everything I have is worth nothing to me every time I see Mordechai sitting at the gates of the king? Why? Why did it bother him so much? So that's very famous Midrash. The Midrash says that actually there's a reason. There's a backstory. The Midrash says Mordechai and Haman had a history before the story of Purim. It's a long story, but they had a history together. What's the story? Mordechai and Haman were both army generals for the Persian kings of the time, for the Babylonian kings of the time, be it as it may. And Haman was out at war with his platoon, and Mordechai was out at war with his platoon. And Haman and his platoon ran out of provisions. They ran out of food and they ran out of water. Mordechai, on the other hand, had rationed the portions very responsibly, and he had plenty. So Haman came to Mordechai to ask Mordechai for food and water for his men so they wouldn't die. And Mordechai said, sure, I'll give it to you, but I want payment. Haman said, I'll buy it for whatever the price. Name the price and I'll buy it. Mordechai said, I don't want money. I want you, Haman, to sell yourself to me, Mordechai, as a slave. And Haman, having no choice, agreed. They wrote it, the Midrash says, Haman, they scratched Haman's finger. They wrote it with Haman's blood on the bottom of Mordechai's shoe. I, Haman, the son of Hamdasa, descendant of Agag, king Amalek, sell myself to Mordechai the Jew in exchange for the food, for the bread, for the water that he will give me and my men, etc., so that we don't die in hunger. The Midrash actually has a traditional copy of the wording of the document that they wrote on the bottom of Mordechai's shoe. Haman signed it. Mordechai gave him provisions. Haman took it back to his men. Everybody survives the war. Baruch Hashem. Everybody makes it, and everybody goes their own way. And one day, Haman is promoted to become the king's viceroy. Over 127 lands. And he's walking around town like he owns the place, and he's telling everybody, bow down to me, and everybody is. And Mordechai is sitting there, says the Midrash, and says, wait a second, Haman, that guy's my slave. I literally own him. He's going to tell me to bow down to him? Since when does a master bow down to his slave? Never. A slave bows down to his master. All right, says Mordechai, I'm not asking him to bow down to me, but let him, my slave, not have the chutzpah to ask me to bow down to him. Mordechai didn't say anything about this past history. He was hoping Haman would have the seichel to keep his mouth shut. But Haman didn't. Haman kept walking around the town, banging on his chest, saying, everybody bow down to me. And they came to him and they said, Mordechai refuses. And Haman says, how dare he? How dare he refuse to bow down to me? So Mordechai went home and picked up the shoe. The shoe where in Haman's handwriting it says that he's Mordechai's slave. And when Haman walked by, Mordechai lifted up his foot with the shoe on it for everyone to see that Haman had sold himself as a slave to Mordechai. And that, at least in part, is why Haman decides he has no choice. He has to kill Mordechai. And he tells his family, V'chol zeh einenu shoiveli, everything that I have, says Haman, is worthless. You know why? Because I'm his slave. Every time I see Mordechai HaYehudi sitting at the gate of the king, I realize that everything I have belongs to him. That's the halacha. Everything that a slave owns is owned by his master. So Haman, the second in command, the most powerful man in all 127 lands, even technically more powerful than Achashverosh because Haman has the ability to manipulate Achashverosh, tells his family in a moment of honesty that he's a slave of Mordechai. And so everything he has is worthless. And Dovid finds himself in almost exactly the same position. He shows up, he wants to lead a quiet life for a couple of years until Shaul finishes out his term and Dovid can take his place as the king. But he's recognized. And Avdei Achish, the servants of Achish, come to him and say to him, do you know what this man represents? This man killed Goliath. What do you want from me, says Achish. What do you want from me, says the Philistine king. What do we want from you? Either you kill him, as Haman wanted to do to Mordechai, or you're his slave. This was the deal that Goliath himself set forth on behalf of the Plishtim. And David killed him. Now you're all his slaves. We the Plishtim, are all Dovid Hamelech's slaves. The only way David was able to save himself from this was by pretending that he was Meshuggah. or actually becoming Meshuggah. Achish refused to believe that this was really the man who killed Goliath, if he was in fact a Meshuggah. What does it mean? According to the teachings of Kabbalah, there are souls that come into this world that are so lofty. There are souls that are neshamas that come into this world that are so gifted, that are so sensitive, that are so spiritual in nature, that they cannot function in the regular way human beings function. The soul cannot live in this world in the regular way that a soul does. The soul is too sensitive. And so, as a way of protecting the soul from sin, as a way of protecting this soul from experiencing the pain of the world the way regular people do, Hashem will sometimes give this individual challenges in their conscious and cognitive abilities, so that they process the reality of the world in a way that is not in line with reality, at least as we know it, in an effort to, so to speak, to protect these souls from exposing them to the harsh realities of the world. According to Kabbalah, the mentally challenged individuals are mentally challenged because of the loftiness of their souls, because they have souls that are too great for the bodies and for the world to handle. And so their mental inabilities create some sort of a barrier where the soul continues to function as a lofty soul that it is, without the world really impacting them as it does the rest of us. That was the Rabbanu Shalom's answer to Dovid Hamelech. Hashem said, these neshamas need to be in this world for whatever divine reason. But so long as they're here, they won't process reality, they won't understand it the same way we do. Their souls will shine in different types of ways than the ordinary people. And that's how they will be protected, and that's how they will live. In this case, Dovid Hamelech, in truth, he really is Dovid Hamelech. He really is Dovid Melech Haaretz. He really is an individual to whom all of the Pelishtim really should be slaves. But for whatever reason, David doesn't feel himself ready. He doesn't feel himself ready to ascend to that throne. Perhaps it wasn't yet the time. He's not ready to take the reins and turn all the Pelishtim into his slaves. So he embraces the trait, in the words of the Pasuk, of a Meshuggah, of a person who cannot process reality in a real way, of a person who has within themselves potential that far, far outweighs the potential of ordinary human beings. And that imbalance comes across as a Meshuggah. And Achish, the king of Gas, dismisses him, and he is saved. In the end, of course, David becomes, much later on, David becomes David Melech Yisrael, the greatest king, one of the greatest kings of the Jewish people ever. He becomes celebrated as David Melech Haaretz, as David Melech Yisrael. And all that inner potential within him, in the end, it's all revealed. It all comes out. At this stage, it wasn't yet, at least according to David, it wasn't yet the time. And so David becomes afraid. And he finds a way to continue concealing his true identity and who he is. There's an old Jewish parable. It's very famous. About a Jew who wants to take a ride on the steam train, when the steam train first comes out. And he wants to ride on the steam train and he saves up money, and he goes to the train station. And without knowing how much is the fare to ride the train, he presents a large amount of money to the teller and says, "Here, I want a ticket to ride on this train." And the teller looks at the Jew, looks at the amount of money, and the teller gives the Jew a red ticket. And the Jew goes to the platform, and the first thing the Jew notices is that everybody else has a yellow ticket. And so the Jew, you know how Jews are. We become frightened. The Jew becomes concerned. Oh my God, was I sold the wrong ticket? Am I in the right place? Am I in the wrong place? Everybody else has a yellow ticket, and the train arrives, and everybody starts boarding, and the Jew decides that he's Afzoris. He turns around, he doesn't know what to do. He asks somebody for help. It turns out the person who he asks for help plays a trick on him, and the person tells the Jew, "This ticket is no good. This ticket is worthless. You don't have a ticket. You're going to get caught, and you're going to be in trouble. The only thing you can do is you can come with me." He says, "Come, we're going to hide under the seats. And there, hopefully, we won't get caught." So the Jew, fearing he has the wrong ticket, hides under the seat together with the other Ganovim. And as he's lying there, his tzitzis stick out from under the seat. And the conductor comes by and sees some strings, pulls on the strings, and out comes the Jew. He tells the Jew, "You have a ticket? You have a ticket to ride the train?" He reaches into his pocket, the Jew, and he's very trepidatious, and he's so fearful and apologetic. He says, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Conductor, here it is. I don't know why they sold me a red ticket. I just noticed everybody else has a yellow ticket. Please don't throw me off the train. Here's my ticket." The conductor looks at the ticket and looks at the Jew and back at the ticket and back at the Jew. He says, "Jew, how much did you pay for this ticket?" And the Jew starts crying. He says, "I don't know. I'm so sorry. I paid 50 rubles. I thought that's how much it costed. Please don't throw me off the train." And the conductor looks at the Jew and goes, "You idiot. You have a first-class ticket. You have a first-class ticket. What are you doing hiding under the seat? Go sit in first class, where they'll wine you and dine you and give you not one seat, but 2 seats. And the seats recline will give you towels and champagne and toothbrushes and slippers and socks and whatever you want. Not 3 meals a day, 6 meals a day. You have a first-class ticket. What are you doing hiding under the seat?" It's an old Jewish parable. Sometimes we find ourselves with first-class tickets. But everybody around us has a yellow ticket. Everybody around us has an ordinary ticket. We feel alone. We feel different. We feel strange. We feel like we don't belong. We wonder, what are we even doing here? All we want to do is hide. We want to not be noticed. But there's always a conductor who notices us. In David's case, he was the servants of Achish who come to the king and say, "You think this man is a simple person? Haloi zeh Dovid Hamelech ha'oretz. This is a Jew with infinite power, with infinite resources, with talents, with gifts, with abilities." And the world says to the Jew, "Who are you?" And the Jew says, "I'm the one who killed Goliath. I'm the Mordechai HaYehudi who refuses to bow down to the Haman. In fact, Haman should bow down to me. I'm the one who killed Goliath, and in one moment, by virtue of Goliath's own pledge, turned all the Plishtim into my servants. I am a child of Hashem. I am invincible, and I am eternal. And when my time comes," says the Jew, "when my moment comes, the world will be mine." Sometimes the world looks at a Jew and says, "You're a Meshuggah. You're crazy. How do you dare think you're going to survive? How do you dare think you're going to thrive in a world like this? You are so different." And sometimes when the world calls a Jew a crazy person, the Jew feels so self-conscious, all they want to do is blend in or hide under the seat. David said to Hashem, "Ribono shel Olam, why did you create Mishuggahim?" The Rebbeinu Shalom says, Mishavayim. These people are powerful and holier and loftier than you and I combined. You think you're normal? You think you're healthy? These people have potential. Their souls are connected and live in a way that you and I will never understand. Maybe one day we will. Maybe one day we won't. Dovid Hamelech experienced his own moment of being labeled as a meshugah, as a crazy person, as an insane person. But he wasn't really insane, of course not. He was an individual who contained within himself potential to be Melech Haaretz. The process of realizing that potential can be a difficult, long, and painful process. But nobody ever gets fooled along the way. The person themselves sometimes needs time to grow into that position. But the world around him, the world around us knows this about us from the beginning. Dovid Melech Haaretz, every Jew, a student or descendant of Dovid Hamelech, including Mashiach, of course, the ultimate descendant of Dovid Hamelech, should remember that the day we're ready to stand up and own our own identity, in truth, the rest of the world is really our slaves. And we are all, like David, Melech Haaretz, in control of the world. May Hashem bless us all with a ksiva v'chasim tova and a wonderful year filled with blessings and simchas. And may we always merit to bring out our true potential. Have a wonderful Shabbos.